Charlie Munger was 98 years old when he stood in front of thousands of Daily Journal shareholders and answered questions for 3 straight hours with the same sharp wit and mental clarity he had at age 40. Most people assume intellectual decline is inevitable. Charlie proved them wrong for nearly 80 years. February 15, 2023. Los Angeles, California, the ballroom at the Pasadena Convention Center. Charlie Munger walks slowly to the podium. He's 99 years old, 34 days away from his 100th birthday. He's wearing his signature navy suit, white shirt, and those iconic thick tortoiseshell glasses. The room is packed. Thousands of Daily Journal Corporation shareholders have flown in from around the world, not to hear about quarterly earnings. To hear Charlie think out loud. He sits down, leans into the microphone, and for the next 3 hours he fields questions about artificial intelligence, monetary policy, banking crises, investment philosophy, and human nature. His answers are sharp, witty, occasionally brutal, completely unfiltered. Someone asks about AI. Charlie pauses, then says, "I think old-fashioned intelligence works pretty well." The room erupts in laughter. Another question about cryptocurrency. Charlie doesn't hesitate. It's a venereal disease. He's not joking. He genuinely believes this, but here's what's remarkable. This isn't a rehearsed speech. There's no teleprompter, no notes. Charlie's drawing from 8 decades of accumulated knowledge. He's connecting ideas from physics, psychology, history, economics, and biology. In real time, at 99 years old, after 3 hours, he stands up, waves, and walks off the stage. 9 months later, on November 28, 2023, Charlie Munger dies peacefully in his sleep. He was 99 years and 331 days old, 34 days from his 100th birthday, but between age 50 and 99, Charlie never stopped learning, never stopped reading, never stopped building his latticework of mental models, and that's exactly what we're breaking down today. I'm Michael, and this is The Wisdom Investor. Today we're diving into something that honestly changed how I think about aging, learning, and what's actually possible in the second half of life. Because here's the thing, most people hit 50, 60, 70 and they start slowing down intellectually. They stop reading challenging books. They stop learning new fields. They assume their best thinking years are behind them. Charlie Munger looked at that narrative and said, "That's complete nonsense." From age 50 until his death at 99, Charlie operated at a level of intellectual intensity that would exhaust most 30-year-olds. And he didn't just maintain his edge, he sharpened it, continuously, relentlessly, for nearly 5 decades after the age most people start coasting. So let's talk about how he did it, and more importantly, how you can apply this system regardless of your current age. Let me take you back to 1974. Charlie Munger is 50 years old. He's already successful. He's a lawyer. He's run an investment partnership for 13 years that returned 19.8% annually while the Dow Jones returned 5%. He's made serious money. Most people at this point would ease up, take the win, enjoy the fruits of their labor. Charlie does the opposite. In 1978, at age 54, he joins Berkshire Hathaway as vice chairman. This isn't a retirement gig. This is the beginning of a 50-year intellectual partnership with Warren Buffett that will transform both of their approaches to investing and thinking. But here's what nobody talks about. Charlie's learning curve accelerated after 50, not despite his age, because of it. Think about what that means for a second. Charlie had spent his 20s and 30s building foundational knowledge. Law degree from Harvard without even finishing his undergraduate degree. Starting his own law firm, launching his investment partnership, reading voraciously across multiple disciplines. But it's in his 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s that all of that knowledge starts compounding at an exponential rate. Warren Buffett said something about Charlie that I think about constantly. He said Berkshire Hathaway could not have been built to its present status without Charlie's inspiration, wisdom, and participation. Now, Warren's obviously brilliant, but what he's acknowledging here is that Charlie brought something different to the table, not just intelligence, wisdom, the kind of wisdom that only comes from decades of systematic learning applied to real-world problems. Let's get specific about what Charlie actually did every single day from age 50 until 99. First, the reading. Charlie has this quote that everyone knows but most people don't truly internalize. He said, "In my whole life, I have known no wise people who didn't read all the time. None. Zero." That's not hyperbole. Charlie literally cannot think of a single wise person who wasn't a voracious reader. His household manager, who worked with him for years, said Charlie's reading obsession was like watching a dog devour a bone. Once he started a book, he couldn't put it down. He'd read late into the night, multiple hours every single day, even in his 90s. And get this, he could finish an entire book in 2 days, at 95 years old. But here's where it gets interesting. Charlie wasn't just reading for entertainment or to stay informed. He was building what he called a latticework of mental models. Let me explain what that actually means. Charlie believed that the big ideas from multiple disciplines carry 95% of the freight when it comes to making good decisions. So he systematically studied psychology, economics, mathematics, physics, biology, engineering, history, and philosophy. Not at a surface level, deep study, the kind where you understand the fundamental principles well enough to apply them across completely different contexts. He said you've got to have models in your head, and you've got to array your experience, both vicarious and direct, on this latticework of models. Now here's why this matters so much after age 50. When you're young, you're accumulating knowledge, you're learning individual concepts. Psychology teaches you about cognitive biases, economics teaches you about incentives, physics teaches you about systems and feedback loops. But when you're older and you've been studying these disciplines for decades, something magical happens. The models start connecting. Psychology explains economics, physics explains biology, history explains human nature. Charlie's brain at 99 wasn't just filled with more information than his brain at 50, it was fundamentally different. The connections between ideas had multiplied exponentially. His latticework had become incredibly dense and robust. That's why he could answer questions about AI, monetary policy, and human psychology in the same 3-hour session. He wasn't pulling from isolated knowledge silos. He was accessing an integrated system of understanding that had been building for 8 decades. Now let me tell you about something that would have ended most people's intellectual journey, but barely slowed Charlie down. Somewhere in his 70s, Charlie lost his left eye. A botched cataract surgery led to something called sympathetic ophthalmia. It's a condition where trauma to one eye triggers an immune response that attacks both eyes. Charlie learned Braille. He prepared to go completely blind. Think about that. He's in his 70s. He's already built a legendary career. He could have retired, stepped back, accepted that this was the end of his reading life. Instead, he learned an entirely new way to read, just in case. Fortunately, the condition eventually receded. He kept partial vision, but the point is this. Charlie's commitment to continuous learning wasn't contingent on perfect circumstances. It was non-negotiable. He was going to keep learning whether he could see or not. That's the level of intellectual hunger we're talking about. Now let's talk about what actually changed in Charlie's thinking between age 50 and 99, because this is fascinating. The answer is not much fundamentally, but everything got sharper. His core principles remained remarkably consistent. The mental models he developed in his 40s and 50s he continued applying for the next 5 decades. Inversion, circle of competence, incentive-caused bias, the power of compounding, the importance of learning from others' mistakes. But his ability to apply those models got better every single year. Warren Buffett tells this story about how Charlie would occasionally say something like, "Warren, that's not quite right." And then he'd explain why with such clarity that Warren would immediately see the flaw in his own thinking. That's not because Charlie was smarter than Warren. It's because Charlie had spent more time deeply thinking through the implications of their shared mental models. Experience plus systematic reflection equals wisdom. Charlie had a saying. He said, "I like people admitting they were complete stupid horses' asses. I know I'll perform better if I rub my nose in my mistakes." This is crucial. Charlie never stopped analyzing his own decisions, even successful ones. Remember the Belridge oil story? Charlie bought 300 shares in 1977 for $34,500, sold them 2 years later for $1.1 million, a 32 times return. Most people would celebrate that win and move on. Charlie called it one of his biggest mistakes, not because he lost money, because he didn't buy more. The opportunity was so obvious, he said, that an idiot could have seen there was no possibility of losing money and a large possibility of making money. This is someone in his 50s analyzing a massive win and extracting a lesson about recognizing and properly sizing obvious opportunities. That habit of brutal self-assessment never stopped. At 98, he was still doing it. Here's another thing Charlie did that most people over 50 don't. He stayed actively engaged in running businesses. From 1984 until 2011, Charlie was chairman of Wesco Financial Corporation. From the early 1970s until his death, he was chairman of Daily Journal Corporation. And obviously, he was vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway from 1978 until November 2023. These weren't honorary titles. Charlie was making real decisions, attending board meetings, analyzing investments, engaging with management teams. At 98 years old, he was still running Daily Journal's investment portfolio, making calls on when to buy or sell positions, thinking through valuations, considering macroeconomic factors. Why does this matter? Because Charlie believed that wisdom without application is just theory. He needed to test his mental models against reality, continuously. The Daily Journal shareholder meetings became legendary for exactly this reason. People didn't fly to Los Angeles to hear prepared remarks. They came to watch Charlie think in real time about complex, nuanced problems. And here's what blew my mind when I started studying these meetings. Charlie's answers in his 90s were sharper than most people's answers in their 30s. Someone would ask about the future of newspapers. Charlie would connect it to the economics of attention, the psychology of habit formation, the history of technological disruption, and the incentive structures of advertising, all in about 90 seconds. That's not memory, that's active synthesis of multiple mental models applied to a current problem. Now let's talk about something Charlie said that I think is the key to everything. He said, "I constantly see people rise in life who are not the smartest, sometimes not even the most diligent, but they are learning machines. They go to bed every night a little wiser than they were when they got up." Read that again. Go to bed every night a little wiser than you were when you got up. That's the entire strategy, captured in one sentence. Not massive transformations, not trying to become brilliant overnight, just 1% wiser today than you were yesterday. Compound that over 50 years and you get Charlie Munger. Here's what that looked like practically. Every single day, Charlie would spend multiple hours reading. He'd read books, he'd read annual reports, he'd read scientific papers, he'd read biographies, he'd read history. But he wasn't passive, he was actively looking for mental models, patterns, principles that could be applied across different domains. When he read about psychology, he wasn't just learning psychology. He was asking, how does this explain investing behavior? How does this explain management decisions? How does this explain historical events? When he read about physics, he wasn't just learning physics. He was asking, what systems thinking principles can I extract? How do feedback loops work? What does this teach me about complex systems? This is what he meant by a lattice work. It's not just knowing things, it's knowing how things connect to other things. And the beautiful part is this: the more connections you build, the easier it becomes to build new connections. At 50, you might see 5 connections between psychology and investing. At 60, you see 50. At 70, you see 500. At 99, the entire lattice work is so interconnected that new information instantly finds its place in the structure. That's why Charlie could learn about AI at 98 years old and immediately have informed opinions. Not because he was an AI expert, Because he understood systems, incentives, human nature, technological adoption curves, and economic moats well enough to reason about it from first principles. Let me tell you about Charlie's last year, because I think this is where everything comes together. In 2023, Charlie is 99 years old. He's attended the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting in May, answered questions alongside Warren for hours. His mind is still sharp. In February, he does the daily journal meeting, 3 hours of unscripted Q&A, no notes, no prepared remarks, just Charlie thinking out loud. In November, just weeks before his death, he's still reading, still learning, still engaged. He dies peacefully on November 28th, 34 days before his 100th birthday. And here's what gets me: Charlie didn't slow down gracefully into old age. He didn't ease into retirement. He didn't accept diminished mental capacity as inevitable. He read until he couldn't read anymore. He learned until he couldn't learn anymore. He thought until he couldn't think anymore. The day before he died, I'd bet everything I own that Charlie Munger went to bed a little wiser than he woke up that morning. That's the standard he set for 80 years. Now let's bring this back to you, whether you're 50, 60, 70, or beyond. What's the lesson here? First, intellectual decline is not inevitable. It's a choice. Charlie proved that you can remain mentally sharp, curious, and engaged well into your 90s if you commit to continuous learning. Second, wisdom compounds. The mental models you build today will be worth exponentially more in 10, 20, 30 years if you keep building on them. Third, the best time to start was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Charlie started building his latticework of mental models in his 20s. But if you're 50 and you're just starting now, you've potentially got 40 or 50 years of compounding ahead of you. That's enough time to build world-class expertise and wisdom. Fourth, breadth matters as much as depth. Charlie wasn't the world's greatest psychologist or economist or physicist, but he understood enough from each field to see the connections others missed. Fifth, application is everything. Don't just read. Test your models against reality. Make decisions. Analyze the outcomes. Adjust your understanding. Sixth, humility accelerates learning. Charlie's willingness to admit mistakes and learn from them made him better every single year. And finally, there's no finish line. Charlie never reached a point where he said, "Okay, I'm wise enough now, I can stop learning." The learning was the point. Warren Buffett said something beautiful about Charlie after he died. He said Charlie was the architect of modern Berkshire Hathaway, not because he picked more stocks than Warren, but because his wisdom shaped how they thought about everything. That's what 50 years of continuous learning looks like. So here's my challenge to you. Commit to going to bed a little wiser every single night for the next year. Read for at least 1 hour daily. Study mental models from multiple disciplines. Apply what you learn to real decisions. Analyze your mistakes brutally. Do that for 1 year and you'll be shocked at how much sharper your thinking becomes. Do it for 10 years and you'll be a different person. Do it for 50 years and you'll be Charlie Munger. The most important thing to understand is this: Charlie's intellectual vitality at 99 wasn't luck. It wasn't genetics. It was systematic, deliberate, continuous learning applied over 8 decades. You can start that system today, right now, regardless of your age. Charlie proved that the second half of life can be the most intellectually productive if you approach it with intention and hunger for wisdom. Most people retire from learning long before they retire from working. Charlie did the opposite. He worked until he died because learning was his work. And honestly, that's what made him legendary, not the $2.6 billion net worth, not the Berkshire Hathaway returns, the fact that he never stopped getting wiser. So here's what I want you to take away from this. If you're over 50, you're not past your prime. You're potentially entering your prime if you commit to continuous learning. The latticework of mental models you can build in the next 20, 30, 40 years could be the most valuable thing you ever create. Charlie Munger spent his 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s building a mind that could think circles around people half his age, not because he was born smarter, because he never stopped learning. That's available to you starting today. Now I want to hear from you. What's one discipline outside your area of expertise that you're going to start studying this week? What mental model are you going to add to your lattice work? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. If you found this valuable, hit that like button and share this episode with someone over 50 who needs to hear this message. It really helps us reach more people who can benefit from Charlie's wisdom. We release new Charlie Munger episodes every day on the Wisdom Investor, so subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. I'm Michael, this is the Wisdom Investor, and I'll see you in the next one.